The Wyoming wind cut through the cemetery like God's own blade, sharp enough to split a man's soul from his body. Cole Mackenzie stood beside his grandfather's grave, the freshly carved headstone already gathering snow in its granite letters. Ezra Mackenzie, 1801-1878, founder of Mackenzie Ranch. The old man had been dead 3 days, buried in ground so frozen they'd needed 2 sticks of dynamite and a pickaxe crew to break through the iron-hard earth. Cole's weathered hands trembled as he broke the wax seal on his grandfather's final letter. Not from cold, though the mercury had dropped to 25 below, and the wind chill made it feel like 40. The trembling came from something deeper, something that whispered this moment would change everything forever. Beside him, 5-year-old Sam stood silent as a tombstone, wrapped in the thick wool coat his mother Eleanor had knitted before the fever took her 8 months ago. The boy hadn't spoken a word since the day they lowered her into this same frozen ground. The letter crackled in the bitter air as Cole unfolded it, his breath forming ice crystals that fell like tiny prayers onto the yellowed paper. Ezra's handwriting, once bold as a cattle brand burned into hide, now wavered like old spider tracks across the page. Each letter looked like it had cost the dying man precious strength. Cole, if you're reading this, I've gone to join your grandmother and the Lord. The ranch is yours now, boy. 2,000 acres of the finest grazing land in Wyoming territory, 200 head of prime Hereford cattle worth $15,000, and the most valuable secret this side of the Continental Divide. But listen close, because what I'm about to tell you could save your life or end it. Cole's eyes moved down the page, each word hitting harder than winter hail. The wind whipped the paper, trying to tear it from his grip, but he held on like his life depended on it. Because maybe it did. There's a condition, and it's not negotiable. According to the Homestead Act of 1862 and the terms of this will, you must have a wife and be actively raising children within 30 days of my death. If not, everything passes to the territorial government under the abandonment clause. They'll auction it off to the highest bidder, and I know exactly who that'll be. Cole felt the blood drain from his face. 30 days. He looked down at Sam, whose pale blue eyes stared at nothing, seeing everything and saying nothing. The boy needed a mother more than he needed his next breath. Cole needed a miracle, and miracles were in short supply during Wyoming winters. Don't despair, grandson. I've spent 2 years arranging something that might sound like madness, but makes perfect sense if you think it through. Go to Willowbrook today. Find a woman named Sarah. She's in trouble, bad trouble, but she's exactly what you and Sam need. She'll need you as much as you need her. Trust an old man's judgment one last time. The future of 3 generations of Mackenzies depends on what you do next. Sam tugged at Cole's heavy coat, his small mittened hand pointing toward the horizon where black smoke rose from the distant town. The boy's touch felt like ice through Cole's leather gloves, but his grip was steady and sure. Whatever lay ahead in Willowbrook, they'd face it together. They always had. Cole folded the letter carefully and tucked it inside his coat, next to his heart. The ride to Willowbrook would take them through some of the most dangerous country in the territory, 15 miles of open range where a man could freeze to death in his saddle if the wind caught him wrong. But they had no choice. Time was running out like sand through winter fingers. The journey to town stretched across country that could kill a man for one moment of carelessness or bad luck. Cole guided Thunder, his black gelding, through snowdrifts that reached the horse's belly, while Sam rode secure in the saddle before him, wrapped in buffalo robes that had kept 3 generations of Mackenzies warm. The boy's silence had become its own language over the past 8 months. A nod meant yes, a shake meant no, and the way he pressed against his father's chest right now meant fear mixed with absolute trust. Cole had prepared for this journey like a military expedition. His Winchester rifle rested in its leather scabbard. 45 rounds of ammunition distributed between his saddlebags and coat pockets. His Colt revolver hung heavy on his right hip, another 6 shots if things went bad. 2 days of dried beef, hardtack, and coffee filled one saddlebag, along with medical supplies and emergency shelter materials. This wasn't paranoia born of city fear. This was Wyoming in the dead of winter, where nature didn't forgive mistakes and desperate men did desperate things when the snow got deep enough to hide bodies until spring. The Mackenzie Ranch sat on some of the most valuable land in Wyoming territory, though few people understood exactly why. What looked like ordinary grazing pasture to most folks held secrets that Ezra had guarded with his life and would have killed to protect. The underground thermal springs that heated their house and barns were just the visible part of something much bigger and more valuable. The old man had discovered geological formations that other men would commit murder to control. Every quarter mile, Cole stopped to check their surroundings and let Thunder rest. The horse's breath formed great clouds of steam in the frigid air, ice forming on his whiskers and around his nostrils. Cole used these stops to scan the horizon for other riders, for signs of wolves or weather changes that could trap them in the open. He also checked Sam for signs of frostbite, examining the boy's cheeks and fingers with practiced care. "Cold, Papa," Sam whispered during one of these stops, the first words he'd spoken in 3 days. "I know, son. Just a few more miles. We'll be warm soon." Cole adjusted the buffalo robe around Sam's small body, making sure no skin was exposed to the killing wind. "Remember the stories grandfather told about brave cowboys who rode through blizzards to save their ranches?" Sam nodded solemnly. The boy remembered everything, stored it all away in that silent mind, like precious treasure. Cole sometimes wondered if Sam's silence came from having too much to remember and no words big enough to hold it all. As Willowbrook came into view below them, Cole felt the familiar weight of those family secrets pressing down like the storm clouds gathering overhead. The town squatted in the valley like a collection of toy buildings, 800 souls trying to scratch out honest livings in one of the harshest places God had ever created. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, but the streets looked too empty for midday, even accounting for the weather. Something was definitely wrong. They rode past Jensen's General Store, the Cattleman's Bank, and Murphy's Saloon, all shuttered tight despite the early hour. People clustered in small groups along the boardwalks, their voices carrying that particular tension that came before violence. Cole caught fragments of conversation as Thunder's hooves crunched through the snow. "Hanging at noon, murderess, about time, and justice finally served." His stomach tightened like a fist. Someone was about to die, and the whole town had turned out to watch. The crowd thickened as they approached the town square, where a gallows stood like a wooden promise against the gray skipine. Cole had witnessed hangings before, both legal and otherwise, but this felt different. The people weren't here for morbid entertainment or frontier justice. They were here for blood, pure and simple, and the excitement in their voices made his skin crawl. "Stay close to me, Sam," Cole murmured, though the boy was already pressed tight against his chest like he was trying to disappear inside his father's coat. They dismounted near the courthouse steps, Cole lifting Sam down before securing Thunder to the hitching post with a knot that could be released quickly if they needed to run. Judge Samuel Grant stood on the courthouse steps, his voice carrying over the muttering crowd like a funeral bell. His normally steady hands shook as he unfolded the death warrant, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. "Victoria Sterling, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of the willful murder of Reverend Michael Collins by means of poison, specifically arsenic administered in tea on the 15th day of December in the year of our Lord, 1878. Cole pushed through the crowd until he could see the condemned woman clearly, using his size and the Mackenzie family reputation to make people step aside. She stood between Sheriff Hayes and Deputy Morrison, hands bound behind her back with rough hemp rope, wearing a simple gray dress that looked like it had been made for a woman twice her size. The clothes hung on her like a scarecrow's outfit, but they couldn't hide the steel in her spine or the fire in her eyes. What stopped Cole's breath wasn't her beauty, though she was striking in a sharp-featured, intelligent way that reminded him of a bird of prey. What froze him in place was her eyes. They were the exact color of the thermal springs back home, that impossible blue-green that seemed to hold light even in the depths of winter. But more than color, it was what he saw burning in those depths. No fear, no pleading, no desperate hope for last-minute rescue. Just a steady resolve that spoke of someone who'd made peace with death and found it wanting. Victoria Sterling looked out over the crowd with the calm dignity of a queen facing execution, her dark hair whipping around her face in the bitter wind. When that wind caught her hair just right, Cole caught something else that made his blood run cold. Recognition flickered in her eyes as they met his across the square, like she'd been waiting for him specifically. Her lips moved carefully, forming a single word that only he could see from this distance. Ezra. Cole's world tilted sideways. She knew his grandfather's name. How was that possible? In his coat pocket, his fingers found the worn envelope he'd discovered 3 months ago while going through Ezra's desk. A letter from someone signed only S, written in a woman's careful handwriting. A letter that spoke of growing danger and the need for help when the time finally came. Bishop Harrington stepped forward, his black coat flapping around him like crow's wings in the wind. The man's face showed the kind of righteous satisfaction that came from watching enemies destroy themselves. Victoria Sterling, have you any final words before God's judgment is carried out upon your wicked soul? Victoria Sterling raised her chin, meeting the bishop's stare without flinching. Instead of words, she began to sing. The melody was unlike anything Cole had ever heard, low and haunting and powerful, with words in a language that sounded older than the English the rest of them spoke. It wasn't a plea for mercy or a confession of sins. It was something stronger and more defiant, a farewell to the world that carried no apology and asked for no forgiveness. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, muttering about witchcraft and devil worship. Someone called out for the rope, but their voice lacked conviction. Even the hardest men in the crowd seemed affected by the strange beauty of that ancient song. Cole found himself taking a step forward, then another. Sam's small hand caught the back of his coat, but the boy didn't try to stop him. Instead, Sam seemed to be pushing him forward, like he understood something the adults had missed. "That's close enough, stranger," called Sheriff Hayes, a weathered man with tired eyes and the careful movements of someone who'd seen too much violence. "This is official territorial business, and we don't need interference from outsiders." Cole reached the edge of the gallows platform, his boots loud on the frozen ground. Every eye in the crowd turned toward him, and he felt the weight of their attention like a physical thing. "I invoke the right of clemency marriage under territorial law," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence that followed. The crowd erupted like a dynamite blast. Voices rose in anger, confusion, and disbelief. Bishop Harrington's face went red as fresh blood, his hands clenching into fists. "This is an abomination before God. You cannot seriously suggest that this murderess should escape justice through some legal technicality." "I'm not suggesting anything," Cole said, his voice cutting through the noise like a knife through silk. "I'm stating my legal right under Colorado Territorial Code, Section 1867. I claim this woman in marriage to commute her death sentence to life imprisonment under my custody and authority." Judge Grant fumbled for his law book, pages fluttering wildly in the wind as his clerk tried to help him find the relevant statute. The crowd pressed closer, and Cole could feel their mood shifting from excitement to ugly anger. Someone in the back shouted about rope being too good for murderers and their defenders. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 3 minutes, Judge Grant looked up from his book, his face pale as parchment. "The law is archaic and rarely invoked, but it remains valid under territorial statute. If the accused agrees to the arrangement and the ceremony is performed immediately by proper authority." He trailed off, clearly hoping someone would find a legal loophole to prevent this unprecedented situation. Victoria Sterling studied Cole with those impossible blue-green eyes, her gaze moving from his face to Sam and back again. When she spoke, her voice was rough from singing but steady as bedrock. "Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." Cole glanced back at Sam, who watched everything with the intensity that only children possess when they sense their world about to change forever. "Because my boy needs a mother, and I think you need someone to believe you are innocent, because no one deserves to hang for a crime they didn't commit." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I think my grandfather would have wanted me to save you." Something profound shifted in Victoria Sterling's expression. Understanding dawned like sunrise, followed by something that might have been relief or gratitude or simple human connection. "You're Ezra Mackenzie's grandson." It wasn't a question, and Cole didn't treat it like one. He simply nodded. "Then yes," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the muttering crowd. "I accept your proposal, I accept your protection, and I accept whatever consequences come from this choice." Those words fell into the winter silence like stones dropped into deep water. The crowd murmured and shifted, But Judge Grant was already moving with the efficiency of a man who wanted this entire situation resolved before it could get worse. Within 10 minutes, they were inside the courthouse, standing before the judge's bench while two hastily summoned witnesses shuffled their feet and avoided eye contact. The ceremony was brief and businesslike, stripped of every romantic notion Cole had ever had about marriage. No rings, no flowers, no promises of love or passion. Just legal words spoken over two strangers while a silent child watched from the front row, his young face serious as a funeral. Do you, Cole Mackenzie, take Victoria Sterling to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, until death do you part? I do. The words came easier than Cole had expected. Do you, Victoria Sterling, take Cole Mackenzie to be your lawfully wedded husband, to love, honor, and obey until death separates you? Victoria looked at Sam for a long moment, then back at Cole. I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Grant signed the certificate with obvious reluctance, his pen scratching across the paper like fingernails on a coffin lid. May God have mercy on both your souls. As they prepared to leave the courthouse, Sheriff Hayes approached with the careful steps of a man walking across thin ice. I'll ride with you folks to the edge of town, he said quietly, his hand resting on his gun butt. There's been considerable talk since the ceremony, and not all of it friendly. Cole nodded his thanks, recognizing the wisdom of accepting help when it was offered freely. He helped Victoria onto the spare horse he'd borrowed from the livery stable, noting how she moved with natural grace despite her exhaustion and the ordeal she'd just endured. Her hands, he noticed, showed calluses that spoke of hard work, and she handled the reins with the confidence of someone who'd spent real time in the saddle. Sam rode between them on Thunder, his young eyes moving constantly between his father and the woman who was now, legally at least, his stepmother. The boy's silence had deepened during the ceremony, but Cole could see wheels turning in that quick mind. Sam was processing everything, filing it away for later consideration. They rode through Willowbrook's main street in a strange procession, past windows where curtains twitched and faces peered out with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. The temperature had dropped another 5 degrees while they'd been inside, and ice formed on their breath before it could dissipate in the wind. At the town limits, Sheriff Hayes reined in his horse and studied the darkening sky with professional concern. Storm's coming in faster than expected, he said. You folks best get home quick and stay there for a few days. Give tempers time to cool down some. Any particular reason you're helping us, Sheriff? Cole asked. Hayes was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Let's just say I've seen innocent people hang before, and it never sits well with a man's conscience. He touched his hat brim in farewell. Take care of yourselves out there. As the sheriff rode back toward town, Cole, Victoria, and Sam continued into the vast whiteness of the Wyoming territory. The wind had picked up significantly, driving snow before it like millions of tiny bullets. Cole estimated they had maybe 90 minutes before the storm hit with full force, and the temperature was dropping fast enough to kill an unprepared traveler. How far to your ranch? Victoria asked, raising her voice to be heard over the wind. 8 miles of hard riding through rough country. Can you handle it? Cole studied her carefully, looking for signs of weakness or fear. I've handled worse, she replied, and something in her voice convinced him she wasn't boasting. What's worse than a Wyoming blizzard? Victoria was quiet for so long that Cole thought she hadn't heard the question. Finally, she said, a husband who beats you with a riding crop and threatens to kill you if you try to leave. Cole felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. Your first husband? Judge Marcus Sterling, a fine, upstanding pillar of the community who made sure everyone knew what a devoted wife and helpless woman I was. Victoria's voice carried no self-pity, just hard facts delivered like a weather report. The bruises were always where they wouldn't show, and the threats were always delivered with a smile. Sam turned in the saddle to look at Victoria, his young face serious. Bad man hurt you? Victoria managed a small smile. Yes, sweetheart, but he's gone now, and your papa won't let anyone hurt me again. Will you, Cole? The question caught him off guard with its directness. No, he said simply. I won't. As they climbed into the foothills that marked the boundary of Mackenzie land, Sam pointed ahead with obvious excitement to where a line of cottonwoods marked the approach to home. Even through the swirling snow, Cole could make out familiar landmarks. The lightning-split pine that marked the turn toward the house, the rocky outcrop where he'd built his first fort as a boy, the gentle rise that hid the thermal springs from casual view. The ranch house came into view as they crested the final ridge, and Cole felt the familiar surge of pride and belonging that always came with this sight. Even in the growing storm, it looked solid and welcoming and permanent. 2 stories of weathered pine logs, windows glowing yellow with lamplight, smoke rising straight up from 3 chimneys before the wind caught it and scattered it across the skirting. The barn and outbuildings clustered around the main house like children gathered around their mother's skirts. "Dear God," Victoria breathed, and Cole heard genuine awe in her voice. "It's beautiful. Grandfather built it to last 3 lifetimes. The original cabin is still there, incorporated into the east wing." Cole guided Thunder toward the barn, eager to get all of them out of the wind. "The whole place runs on geothermal heat. You'll see." They reached the barn just as the first hard snow began to fall in earnest. Cole helped Victoria down from her horse, noting again how she immediately moved to help with Sam despite her own exhaustion. Whatever else she might be hiding, she understood what children needed and wasn't afraid to provide it. The barn was warm and dry, heated by the same thermal spring system that warmed the main house. Cole had grown up taking this luxury for granted, but he saw Victoria's surprise and appreciation for the sophisticated engineering involved. "This is incredible," she said, examining the network of pipes and vents with obvious intelligence. "The planning alone must have taken years. Your grandfather was quite an engineer." "You know about engineering?" Cole asked, surprised. "I know about a lot of things most women aren't supposed to understand. Pharmacy, medicine, engineering, law, business." Victoria paused in her examination of the heating system. "I had an unusual education for a woman, and an even more unusual marriage. I learned to be useful in ways that most wives never need to consider." Before Cole could ask what she meant by that, Sam tugged at Victoria's skirt. The boy had found a wooden box on one of the workbenches, and he held it up with a questioning expression that clearly asked for permission to explore. "That's some of Grandfather's woodworking tools," Cole explained. "He was always making something." Victoria knelt to Sam's level and examined the box with him. "Would you like to see what's inside?" Sam nodded eagerly, and Victoria carefully opened the box to reveal a collection of small carving tools. Each one fitted perfectly into its own space. At the bottom of the box lay a half-finished carving of a horse, the wood smooth and warm to the touch. "Grandfather was making that for you," Cole told Sam. "He said every cowboy needed a good horse, even if it was just a wooden one." Sam picked up the carving with careful hands, studying every detail with the concentrated attention that marked all his interactions with the world. For a moment, Cole thought the boy might speak, but instead, Sam simply held the horse against his chest like it was alive. They made their way through the connecting passage from barn to house, another of Ezra's innovations that kept the family from having to brave the weather for daily chores. The house welcomed them with warmth and the lingering sense of bread and coffee, evidence of Mrs. Chen's care in keeping things ready for their return. The main room exceeded every promise Cole had made during the ride. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, its flames casting dancing shadows across polished wood floors that reflected the light like water. Comfortable chairs upholstered in leather and wool clustered around the hearth, and bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes on everything from agriculture to philosophy. A large dining table crafted from a single piece of oak occupied the center of the room, set with dishes that gleamed in the firelight. Victoria moved through the space with careful attention, her fingers trailing over furniture and door frames as if she were memorizing textures and proportions. She paused longest at the mantelpiece, where photographs of 3 generations of Mackenzies looked down at her with serious expressions. "Your grandfather," she said, touching the frame that held Ezra's formal portrait. It wasn't a question. "You corresponded with him." This time Cole made it a statement, and Victoria didn't pretend otherwise. "For nearly 2 years, he offered sanctuary if I ever needed it." She looked directly at Cole, her blue-green eyes reflecting the firelight. "I needed it more than he could have imagined when we first began writing." Before Cole could respond, Sam approached Victoria with something clutched in his small hands. He held up a wooden box that Cole recognized immediately, Ezra's correspondence box, where the old man had kept his most important letters. "That's private, Sam," Cole started to say, but Victoria was already kneeling beside the boy. "May I look inside?" she asked Sam gently. "Sometimes grown-ups keep important things in boxes like this." Sam nodded solemnly and helped her lift the lid. Inside were dozens of letters tied with ribbons of different colors: red for business correspondence, green for family letters, blue for personal matters, and white for what Ezra had called important secrets. Victoria found the bundle tied with blue ribbon and pulled out a letter bearing her own handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly as she recognized it. "May I read this aloud?" she asked Cole. He nodded, settling into one of the chairs by the fire while Sam climbed onto his lap with the wooden horse still clutched in his small hands. Victoria unfolded the letter and read in a voice barely above a whisper. "Dear Mr. Mackenzie, my situation grows more dangerous by the day. Judge Sterling's associates are becoming suspicious of what I know about their business arrangements. The evidence I've gathered could destroy several important men, but it could also get me killed if they discover what I've learned. If something should happen to me, please remember our agreement about Cole and young Sam. They will need protection, and I pray that I might be able to provide it in exchange for the sanctuary you have offered. Your devoted correspondent, S." She looked up to find both Cole and Sam watching her with complete attention. The only sound in the room was the crackling of the fire and the wind beginning to howl outside. "I think," Victoria said carefully, "it's time I told you who I really am and why your grandfather felt compelled to save my life." Cole shifted Sam to a more comfortable position and prepared to listen to whatever truth this remarkable woman was finally ready to share. Outside, the storm continued to build, but inside, three people who had been strangers that morning began the delicate process of becoming something that might eventually become a family. Victoria set down the letter with hands that trembled only slightly, then moved to the window where snow was beginning to accumulate against the glass like nature's own prison bars. The silence in the room stretched until even the fire seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her to begin the story that would explain everything or damn them all. "My name isn't Victoria Sterling," she said finally, her voice carrying the weight of 2 years of deception and fear. "It's Sarah Elizabeth Mitchell. I was married to Judge Marcus Sterling for 3 years before I fled for my life, and I've been running ever since." Cole adjusted Sam on his lap, the boy's wooden horse forgotten as he sensed the gravity of the moment. Outside, the wind was picking up, rattling the shutters, and promising a storm that would trap them all together until morning. "Tell me everything." Sarah turned from the window, firelight catching the sharp angles of her face and making her look older, harder, like someone who'd learned to survive in a world that offered no quarter to the weak or naive. "Marcus wasn't just corrupt, Cole. He was evil in the way that only respectable men can be evil, hiding behind law and social position while destroying everything he touched." She moved to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the leather spines as if drawing strength from the accumulated wisdom of generations. "For 3 years, I lived in a beautiful house in Denver, wore expensive clothes, attended church every Sunday, and smiled while my husband systematically sold justice to the highest bidder." "What kind of corruption exactly?" Cole asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Land deals mostly. Railroad rights of way, mineral claims, water rights, anything valuable that could be transferred from honest folks to men with enough money to buy a judge's decision." Sarah's voice remained steady, but Cole could see the cost of these revelations in the tight lines around her eyes. Marcus would receive cases involving disputed property, and within days, mysterious envelopes full of cash would appear in his study. A week later, he'd rule in favor of whoever had paid the most. Men lost their life savings, families lost their homes, children went hungry, and Marcus grew richer with every corrupt decision. Sam stirred on Cole's lap and spoke in a small, clear voice that carried absolute moral certainty. "Bad man hurt people." Sarah's expression softened as she looked at the boy, her voice gentling. "Yes, sweetheart, a very bad man who hurt many, many people. But he's gone now, and he can't hurt anyone anymore." "How did you discover the extent of his crimes?" Cole pressed. "I learned to pick locks." The simple statement hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Marcus kept me isolated, controlled every aspect of my life, monitored my correspondence, chose my friends, decided what books I could read and what places I could visit. But he underestimated my intelligence and my desperation. She returned to her position by the fire, settling gracefully into the chair across from Cole with the practiced movements of someone who'd learned to make herself small and unobtrusive. I spent 18 months learning to open his desk, his safe, his filing cabinets. I copied documents, made lists of names and dates and amounts. I was building a case against him, though I had no earthly idea what I'd do with the evidence once I had it. Why didn't you go to the territorial authorities? Sarah's laugh held no humor, just bitter knowledge earned through hard experience. Marcus was the authorities, Cole. He had arrangements with Sheriff Donovan, with Mayor Harrison, with half the territorial government from Denver to Cheyenne. The corruption went deeper than one crooked judge. It was a network of powerful men who turned the entire legal system into their personal money-making scheme. Cole was beginning to understand the true scope of what Sarah had uncovered, and it made his blood run cold. You mentioned he had a partner named Cornelius Wade. Wade was more than a partner. He was the architect of the entire operation, the spider sitting in the center of a web that stretched across 3 territories. Sarah's voice hardened with remembered fear and helpless rage. He represented Eastern investors who wanted to acquire Western land cheaply and quickly. Railroad companies, mining syndicates, cattle barons who needed massive acreage for their operations. Wade would identify valuable properties through surveys and geological reports, then arrange for legal challenges to the current ownership. Marcus would ensure those challenges succeeded in court, forcing the original owners into bankruptcy or simply ruling against them outright. Wade's clients would then purchase the land for pennies on the dollar. Cole felt sick as he realized the implications. How many families lost everything to this scheme? Hundreds, maybe thousands over the years they'd been operating. Ranchers who'd worked their land for decades, miners who'd filed legitimate claims and followed every regulation, homesteaders who'd broken their backs, proving up their quarter sections. Sarah stood and moved to the window again, watching the snow fall like a curtain across the landscape, all destroyed by a system designed specifically to steal their dreams and their futures. What finally made you decide to run? What was the breaking point? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her breath fogging the cold glass as memories she'd tried to bury came flooding back. I discovered that Eleanor Mackenzie was on their target list. The words hit Cole like a physical blow, driving the air from his lungs. Sam looked up at his father with wide, confused eyes, sensing the sudden tension but not understanding its source. Your wife had done extensive research on water rights and mineral claims throughout this region of Wyoming territory. She documented the value of thermal springs, underground mineral deposits, natural resources that most people didn't even know existed. Sarah turned back to face Cole, her blue-green eyes reflecting the firelight. Wade needed that research, and he needed the land it identified as valuable. Eleanor never mentioned meeting anyone from Denver, never said anything about business dealings. She wouldn't have known who she was really dealing with. Wade was always careful to approach targets through intermediaries, professors, government surveyors, people who seemed to have legitimate academic or official reasons for requesting information. Sarah's voice grew gentle as she saw the pain in Cole's face. They offered to purchase her research for what they claimed were scholarly purposes. When she refused and said her work wasn't for sale, they began investigating other ways to acquire it. Cole's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles going white. Are you saying they murdered my wife for her research notes? I'm saying that 3 weeks before Eleanor died, Marcus received a payment of $5,000 from Wade, more money than a judge's annual salary, along with specific written instructions regarding what he called the Mackenzie problem. 2 weeks later, Eleanor developed symptoms entirely consistent with gradual arsenic poisoning. The room seemed to spin around Cole. Sam slipped from his lap and moved to stand beside Sarah, taking her hand with the instinctive trust that children show toward people who tell them difficult truths without trying to shield them from reality. I tried to warn her, Sarah continued, her voice thick with guilt and regret. I knew something terrible was being planned, but I didn't know how to contact her without exposing myself and signing my own death warrant. By the time I worked up the courage to act, it was too late. Eleanor was dead, and I was trapped in a house with a man who'd ordered the murder of an innocent woman. How did you finally manage to escape? Sarah's smile was grim and held no warmth. Marcus made a fatal mistake. He celebrated Eleanor's death with too much whiskey and too many boasts about his own cleverness. He told me exactly how Wade had arranged the poisoning, using what he called community assets, to deliver contaminated medicine to Eleanor during her final illness. Mrs. Harrington, Cole said, pieces of the puzzle falling into place with horrible clarity. Bishop Harrington's wife brought Eleanor special herbal tea during her last week, said it would help with the fever. Most likely, though she probably had no idea what she was really doing. Wade was always careful to use respected community members as unwitting accomplices. They genuinely believed they were helping a sick neighbor, right up until their innocent actions killed someone. Boone tugged on Sarah's hand, his young voice cutting through the adult conversation with startling directness. Mama Eleanor got sick from bad tea that lady brought? Sarah knelt to the boy's level, her expression infinitely gentle, despite the darkness of what they were discussing. Yes, sweetheart, someone gave her medicine that was supposed to help her feel better, but was poison instead. Like what happened to Reverend Collins. Cole and Sarah exchanged a sharp, meaningful look. Sam's comment had just connected dots that neither adult had considered. What do you mean, Sam? Cole asked carefully. Reverend Collins got sick after drinking tea too, just like Mama Eleanor. He told you the tea tasted funny and made his tongue feel numb, but the nice lady said it would help his winter cough. Sam's young voice carried the absolute certainty of a child who remembered everything because adults had taught him that details mattered. Sarah's face went pale as winter moonlight. When exactly did this happen, sweetheart? 2 weeks ago, right before all the grown-ups started saying that you hurt the Reverend, but you were already in jail when he got sick, so you couldn't have given him any tea. Sam looked between the two adults with confusion. Why did they say you did something bad when you were locked up? Cole felt the final pieces of the conspiracy clicking into place with sickening clarity. They framed you for a murder they committed themselves. Wade needed me silenced permanently, but he also needed a scapegoat to explain away Reverend Collins' death, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. I suspect the Reverend had discovered something about Eleanor's murder or Wade's land acquisition schemes. Maybe he'd gotten suspicious about Mrs. Harrington's sudden interest in delivering medicine to sick parishioners. Two birds with one stone, Cole said grimly. Eliminate a potential witness and blame the person who could expose their entire operation. Before either adult could say more, Sam's face suddenly lit up with the innocent excitement of childhood discovery. I can draw the lady who brought the tea, he announced. I saw her both times when she came to see Mama Eleanor and when she came to visit Reverend Collins. I remember faces really good. Sarah and Cole exchanged another look, this one filled with hope rather than despair. That's a wonderful idea, Sam, Sarah said gently. Would you like to draw pictures for us? The boy nodded eagerly and ran to fetch paper and charcoal from his grandfather's desk. As he settled on the floor to begin his artwork, Sarah moved closer to Cole. A child's testimony and drawings wouldn't hold up in territorial court, she said quietly. No, but they'd give us leverage. Wade's entire operation depends on maintaining respectability and working within corrupt legal channels. If word gets out that he's been using bishops' wives to poison people. Before Cole could finish the thought, the sound of horses approaching through the snow made them all freeze. Cole moved quickly to the window, peering through the gathering darkness. 5 riders, coming fast despite the weather. They're not trying to be subtle about it. Sarah joined him at the window, her shoulder touching his, as they both tried to identify the approaching threat. Wade's men? The lead rider is too well dressed to be hired muscle. Expensive coat, fine horse. That's someone with money and authority. Cole moved to collect his rifle from above the fireplace. Sam, remember what grandfather taught you about keeping safe when strangers come calling? The boy looked up from his drawing, immediately serious. Root cellar if there's shooting. Tunnel to the barn if we need to run. Hidden room behind the bookshelf if we need to hide for a long time. That's my smart boy. Cole checked his weapon, ensuring it was loaded and ready. If I tell you to take Sarah somewhere safe, you do it immediately. No questions asked. Sarah caught his arm, her grip firm and determined. Cole Mackenzie, if you think I'm going to hide in a root cellar while you face these men alone, you clearly don't understand the woman you married. I understand that Sam needs at least one of us to survive this, and you're the one with information that could bring down Wade's entire operation. The riders drew closer and Cole could make out more details in the lamplight spilling from the house windows. The lead man sat his horse with the arrogant confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation, money, or violence. Beside him rode Bishop Harrington, his dark coat making him look like a messenger of death. I recognize the tall one, Sarah said, her face draining of all color. That's Cornelius Wade himself. Cole's jaw tightened as understanding dawned. The past hadn't just caught up with them. It had ridden directly to their front door with obvious hostile intent. He turned to Sam, who watched everything with those two knowing eyes that had already seen far more violence and loss than any 5-year-old should have to witness. Remember everything grandfather taught you, son. All the rules for when dangerous men come to the ranch. Sam nodded solemnly, then surprised both adults by moving to Sarah and taking her hand with complete trust. Mama Sarah, will you stay with me if the bad men try to hurt Papa? Yes, sweetheart. I'll stay right beside you no matter what happens. The riders stopped just outside the circle of warm light from the house windows, their horses snorting and stamping in the cold, breath forming clouds of steam in the frigid air. Wade's voice carried clearly through the winter stillness. Mackenzie, come out here. We have business to discuss. Cole opened the front door but kept his rifle ready and stayed in the protective shadows of the doorframe. Talk from where you are, Wade. You are not welcome on Mackenzie land. Wade's smile was visible, even at that distance, white teeth gleaming in a face that radiated predatory satisfaction and absolute confidence in his own power. Mackenzie land? I'm afraid that's a matter of considerable legal dispute considering the highly questionable circumstances surrounding your recent marriage. My marriage is legal, properly witnessed, and officially recorded with the territorial government. Is it, though, marriage to a condemned murderess, performed under obvious duress, for the transparent purpose of circumventing justice? Wade urged his horse a few steps closer, testing Cole's resolve and defensive positioning. I have an entire law firm in Denver that would argue such a union violates both territorial statutes and basic principles of common decency. Cole kept his rifle ready, but not obviously threatening. What do you want, Wade? I want to resolve this unfortunate situation in a manner that benefits everyone involved. Wade's voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who'd conducted hundreds of similar negotiations. I'm prepared to be exceedingly generous about the complications you've created. I'm listening, but keep talking from there. $30,000 for your ranch, cash money, immediate transfer, no legal complications or embarrassing questions about the legitimacy of your current domestic arrangements. Wade's offer carried the weight of serious money, enough to buy a small town or start over anywhere in the country. The sum was staggering, more than triple the ranch's assessed value and enough to set up a new life far from Wyoming territory, which told Cole everything he needed to know about Wade's desperation and the true value of what lay beneath Mackenzie's soil. Not interested, Cole replied flatly. Everyone has a price, Mackenzie. The only question is whether we discover yours through negotiation or through other, less pleasant methods. Wade's voice hardened, showing the steel beneath his civilized veneer. 40,000? 50? Or perhaps you'd prefer to discuss this matter after your wife has been returned to Willowbrook to face additional charges related to her criminal past? She's under my protection now, and you have no legal authority on my property. Wade's laugh cut through the cold air like breaking glass, sharp enough to draw blood. Legal authority? My dear naive rancher, I represent business interests worth more than this entire territory's annual budget. I have judges, sheriffs, territorial officials, and federal marshals on my permanent payroll. What possible authority do you think protects you out here in the middle of absolute nowhere? Cole raised his rifle slightly, the movement deliberate and unmistakable in its implications. Smith & Wesson authority, Winchester authority, Colt authority. Take your pick, Wade. Wade's expression shifted from confident negotiation to cold, calculating assessment of Cole's defensive capabilities and resolve. You're making a grave mistake, Mackenzie. A mistake that will cost you everything you hold dear, your land, your freedom, your family, and ultimately, your life. The only mistake would be trusting a man who poisons innocent women and frames others for his crimes. For the first time since his arrival, Wade showed genuine surprise, his composure slipping enough to reveal the predator beneath the businessman's facade. How very interesting. Your wife has been telling tales, I see. My wife has been telling the truth, something you wouldn't recognize if it rode up and introduced itself personally. Wade studied the house for a long, tense moment, his calculating gaze moving systematically from window to window, as if cataloging defensive positions and potential weaknesses for future reference. You have until tomorrow at noon to reconsider my offer, Mackenzie. After that deadline passes, I'll be forced to pursue alternative remedies to resolve our disagreement. Don't bother riding back out here, Wade. My answer will be exactly the same tomorrow as it is tonight. Wade wheeled his horse around with unnecessary violence, the animal sliding on the icy ground and fighting for balance. This conversation is far from over, Mackenzie. You have no idea what forces you're choosing to oppose. As the riders disappeared into the swirling snow and gathering darkness, Cole secured the door and began checking all the windows, his mind already working through defensive preparations and contingency plans. When he turned back to the room, he found Sarah standing with Sam in her arms, both of them watching him with expressions of trust and confidence that he wasn't entirely sure he deserved. "How long do we have before they come back?" Sarah asked. "Not long enough to evacuate, too long to stay at maximum alert." Cole moved methodically through the house, ensuring all the shutters were properly latched and the rifle ports were clear. Wade's not the type to make idle threats, and he's got too much money invested in this land to walk away from a simple legal challenge. Sarah set Sam down and began examining the house's layout with the strategic eyes of someone who'd learned to think like a survivor rather than a victim. "Your grandfather built this place for defense as well as comfort, didn't he? 3 generations of Mackenzies learned to be ready for trouble of all kinds. Indians, outlaws, claim jumpers, harsh weather, corrupt officials. Grandfather always said this country didn't forgive weakness, poor planning, or naive trust in other people's good intentions." "Show me everything," Sarah said simply. Cole spent the next hour walking Sarah and Sam through all of Ezra's defensive innovations. The house had been constructed like a small fortress, with thick log walls capable of stopping rifle fire, steel shutters that could be closed and barred from the inside, and carefully positioned shooting ports that provided excellent fields of fire covering all possible approaches to the buildings. Most impressive was the thermal spring system that provided both heating and a completely reliable water source that couldn't be poisoned, cut off, or controlled by enemies. The network of insulated pipes carried hot water throughout the house and outbuildings, creating a defensive advantage that few attackers would expect or know how to counter. Even more remarkable was Ezra's tunnel system. Over the course of 20 years, the old man had dug a network of underground passages connecting the main house to the barn, the root cellar, and a carefully concealed exit point nearly a quarter-mile away in the dense woods. The tunnels were high enough for adults to move through comfortably and wide enough for supplies, weapons, or wounded people to be transported safely. "Your grandfather was quite the military engineer," Sarah observed, examining the concealed entrance behind the bookshelf with obvious admiration. "He learned engineering in the army, fought in the Mexican War, and saw action against hostile tribes during the early settlement period." Cole demonstrated how to operate the hidden mechanism that opened the passage. "Sam knows all these routes by heart. If things go bad, he can get both of you to safety while I hold off whatever Wade throws at us." "What about you, Cole Mackenzie?" Sarah's voice carried steel underneath the concern. "If you think I'm going to let you die alone defending this place while Sam and I run for the hills like frightened rabbits, you don't understand the first thing about the woman you married this morning." Before Cole could argue the point, an entirely new sound interrupted their conversation. A single rider approaching through the storm, moving slowly and carefully but steadily toward the house. Cole grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, with Sarah close behind him. The rider was alone, an elderly man bundled in a heavy coat and wool muffler, leading a heavily loaded pack horse through the deepening snow. As he drew closer to the house, Cole could see white hair beneath the man's hat and the careful, deliberate movements of someone who'd spent a lifetime in academic pursuits rather than physical labor. Professor Whitmore, Cole breathed with relief and surprise. You know him? Thomas Whitmore, geologist from the university in Denver. He was grandfather's oldest and closest friend. Cole opened the door as the professor dismounted stiffly from his horse. Professor, what in God's name brings you out in weather like this? Thomas Whitmore stamped snow from his boots and accepted Cole's help with his horse's reins, moving like a man who'd spent too many hours in the saddle despite his advanced age. Your grandfather's letter, naturally. Ezra wrote to me 3 months ago, asking me to come here immediately if anything happened to him. The professor's sharp eyes found Sarah and Sam standing by the fireplace. I assume this is the young lady Ezra was so deeply concerned about. Sarah Mackenzie now, legally speaking. My wife as of this afternoon. Cole performed quick introductions while they moved the professor's supplies and scientific equipment inside. What exactly did grandfather tell you in his letter? Everything that mattered, I suspect. About Wade's growing interest in your property, about the escalating danger to your family's safety, about the true geological value of what lies beneath Mackenzie Ranch. Professor Whitmore settled gratefully into a chair by the fire, accepting the hot coffee Sarah poured for him with obvious appreciation. Ezra Mackenzie was many things over the course of our 40-year friendship, but he was never a man to ignore approaching storms of any variety. Sam approached the professor with the natural curiosity that marked all his interactions with interesting new people. Are you really a scientist who studies rocks? I am indeed, young man. I study rocks and water and soil and all the fascinating secrets they hold about our world. Whitmore reached into his coat and produced a small, brilliantly colored mineral specimen. Would you like to see something genuinely remarkable? Sam nodded eagerly, and the professor held the stone near the lamplight, causing it to shift through a spectrum of colors like a rainbow trapped in crystal. This particular mineral sample came from your family's ranch, Sam. See how it changes color when the light hits it from different angles? That's because it contains chemical elements that most people have never heard of, elements that could revolutionize both medicine and industry. Cole leaned forward with sharp, focused interest. What kind of elements are we talking about, Professor? Rare earth minerals, primarily. Naturally occurring compounds of lithium, magnesium, sulfur, and other substances in combinations that occur in only a few places on Earth. Whitmore set down his coffee and moved to his supply packs, producing a thick leather portfolio. Your grandfather asked me to bring these documents if anything ever happened to him. The professor spread the contents of the portfolio across the dining table. Detailed geological surveys, mineral analyses, scientific drawings, and research documentation spanning 3 decades of careful study. Everything needed to prove the true geological and commercial value of Mackenzie Ranch to any court, university, or business consortium in the country. Sarah examined the documents with obvious intelligence and growing amazement, her eyes widening as she absorbed the full implications of what she was seeing. Professor, these mineral deposits are worth millions of dollars. Conservative estimates, assuming careful extraction and proper processing techniques, put the potential value at $50 million over a 20-year period. Whitmore's voice carried the deep satisfaction of a man who'd spent decades proving a complex scientific theory. The thermal springs you've been using for heating are merely the surface manifestation of a much larger and more valuable underground geological system. Cole felt the world shift beneath his feet. Wade knows about this. Wade strongly suspects the existence of valuable deposits, but he doesn't possess the scientific proof necessary to attract serious investors or justify major extraction operations. The professor spread an incredibly detailed survey map across the table. That's precisely why he's been attempting to acquire your land through legal manipulation and intimidation rather than straightforward purchase at fair market value. These surveys show the full extent of the mineral formations. Your ranch sits directly on top of the richest and most accessible deposits in the entire Rocky Mountain region. Whitmore's finger traced the underground formations marked on his map. Wade needs this documentation to convince Eastern investors that the enormous expense of mining operations would be justified by the potential profits. Cole studied the map with new understanding, seeing his family's land through the eyes of a geologist rather than a rancher. This is what they killed Eleanor for. Eleanor was conducting her own independent research, documenting the medicinal properties of your thermal springs and beginning to understand their true geological significance. Whitmore's voice grew grim with the weight of terrible knowledge. She was perhaps 6 months away from making discoveries that would have duplicated my own findings and brought immediate attention from the scientific community. Wade couldn't risk that kind of scrutiny, Sarah added, her voice tight with anger and understanding. Exactly. Eleanor Mackenzie's research, combined with her husband's reputation and the family's legal ownership of the land, would have made it impossible for Wade to continue his covert acquisition attempts. The professor carefully rolled up the survey map. A published scientific paper about the Mackenzie thermal springs would have brought geologists, mining engineers, and business investors from around the world. Sam, who had been listening to the adult conversation with the intense focus that children bring to discussions that might affect their future, tugged on the professor's coat sleeve. Can the special rocks help sick people get better? They absolutely can, young man. The minerals dissolved in your spring water have therapeutic properties that could treat diseases and conditions that regular medicine struggles to address. Whitmore's voice gentled as he addressed the boy. Arthritis, certain skin conditions, even some types of mental distress respond remarkably well to treatment with these particular mineral compounds. Sarah looked up from the geological documents with dawning understanding and excitement. That's why Eleanor was so passionate about documenting everything so carefully. She wasn't just studying plants and water quality. She was on the verge of medical discoveries that could help thousands of people. Precisely. Eleanor Mackenzie was developing treatment protocols that would have made her famous in medical circles throughout America and Europe, while simultaneously bringing international attention to this region and your family's property. Whitmore's expression showed both admiration for Eleanor's work and anger at her untimely death. Wade simply could not allow that level of scientific scrutiny and public attention. Cole moved to the window, scanning the darkness for signs of additional unwanted visitors while processing the magnitude of what the professor had revealed. How many people currently know about your research findings? At this moment, the four of us in this room, plus whoever Wade has working for him in terms of geological assessment and business planning. Whitmore followed Cole to the window, both men instinctively checking their surroundings. I've kept my findings completely confidential at Ezra's specific request, waiting for the proper time to publish and present them to the scientific community. What would constitute the proper time? When the Mackenzie family is strong enough financially, legally, and politically to protect their legitimate interests and benefit from their inheritance, rather than being destroyed or displaced by it. Sarah joined them at the window, her shoulder again touching Cole's as they looked out into the storm that was rapidly becoming a full blizzard. Wade won't wait much longer to make his move. Every day we maintain control of this land is another day he can't begin serious extraction operations or bring in the heavy equipment and large crews that mining would require. Then we need to be prepared for whatever he's planning. Cole turned to address the professor directly. Can your research and grandfather's defensive preparations help us fight off a direct assault? Professor Whitmore smiled, and for the first time since his arrival, he looked less like a kindly academic and more like a man who'd survived frontier life for nearly 70 years, through intelligence, preparation, and when necessary, violence. My dear boy, I didn't ride through a blizzard carrying 40 pounds of scientific equipment just to deliver paperwork and have a pleasant chat by your fire. I brought everything we need to transform your grandfather's ingenious engineering and natural geological advantages into the most effective defensive system in Wyoming territory. As if summoned by the professor's confident words, Sam appeared beside them carrying Ezra's wooden toolbox, struggling slightly with its weight, but determined to contribute. Grandpa's special tools for building things, he announced proudly. Professor Whitmore opened the toolbox with reverent hands, revealing instruments that looked more suited to a university laboratory than a ranch workshop. Precision measuring devices, chemical testing equipment, and engineering tools designed for very specific technical applications. Ezra and I spent years designing modifications to his thermal spring system, Theoretical improvements that would transform a simple heating arrangement into something much more strategically valuable. The professor's eyes gleamed with scientific enthusiasm, mixed with very personal satisfaction at the prospect of putting theory into practice. Cole examined the unusual tools and technical drawings with growing interest and respect for his grandfather's long-term planning. What kind of strategic modifications are we talking about? The kind that turns superheated mineral chiquita into a defensive weapon that would make attacking your ranch the last mistake that Wade's hired gunmen ever have the opportunity to make. Whitmore spread technical diagrams across the table beside his geological surveys. Would you like to learn how to make geology and engineering into your most powerful allies, Mr. Mackenzie? As the storm continued to intensify outside their warm sanctuary, four people gathered around the firelight to begin planning the defense of Mackenzie Ranch against forces that would stop at nothing to steal 3 generations of family legacy. Sam contributed his detailed knowledge of the house's hidden passages and secret rooms. Sarah provided crucial intelligence about Wade's methods and available resources. Professor Whitmore offered scientific expertise and Ezra's carefully planned modifications. And Cole coordinated everything into a comprehensive strategy that might just keep them all alive until help could arrive. The thermal springs that had heated their home and barns for 30 years were about to become the foundation of their survival. And somewhere in the growing darkness beyond the storm, Cornelius Wade was finalizing plans for an assault that would either make him the richest man in the territory or provide him with a very expensive grave in the frozen Wyoming ground. The legacy of 3 generations of Mackenzies would be decided within the next 48 hours, and the outcome would depend entirely on the courage of 2 damaged souls finding strength in each other, the wisdom of a child who remembered everything his grandfather had taught him, and the brilliant scientific mind of an old man who'd spent decades preparing for this exact moment. Dawn would bring the ultimate test of their preparations and the true measure of their courage to defend what 3 generations of Mackenzies had built through honest labor and uncompromising determination. The night passed in fitful watches and restless preparation. By 4 a.m., none of them pretended to sleep anymore. They moved through their seasonal tasks with quiet efficiency, Cole checking ammunition counts, Sarah organizing medical supplies, Professor Whitmore calibrating pressure gauges on the thermal system, and Sam memorizing every detail of their defensive plans. Dawn broke gray and bitter over Mackenzie Ranch on Christmas Eve morning, the kind of dawn that promised violence before the sun reached its weak winter peak. Cole stood at the kitchen window, watching ice crystals form intricate patterns on the glass, while he sipped coffee that tasted like burnt hope and grim determination. Behind him, Professor Whitmore worked methodically at the dining table, making final adjustments to the devices that would either save their lives or mark their graves in the frozen Wyoming soil. The night had passed without sleep for any of the adults. They'd spent the dark hours transforming Ezra's ingenious heating system into something that would have made military engineers proud and enemy soldiers terrified. The thermal springs that had warmed 3 generations of Mackenzie families were about to become weapons of war, geological artillery that could turn superheated mineral water into a defensive barrier more effective than stone walls or steel gates. "How much time do we have?" Sarah asked, entering the kitchen with Sam close behind her. The boy carried his wooden horse in a small leather bag containing the few treasures that mattered most to a 5-year-old facing an uncertain future: a button from his mother's favorite dress, a smooth stone from the creek, and a letter his grandfather had written to him before dying. Wade said noon yesterday, but men like him don't honor their own deadlines. When it suits their purposes, it's better to strike without warning. Cole didn't turn from the window, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of approaching riders. Could be any time after full daylight, could be right now for all we know. Professor Whitmore looked up from his work, spectacles glinting in the early light filtering through frost-covered windows. The thermal system modifications are complete and tested. Every approach to the house and barn is now covered by what I've come to think of as geological artillery. The question is whether we'll have sufficient warning to implement our defensive strategy effectively. Sam approached the professor with the serious expression he'd worn since yesterday's revelations about his mother's death and the true scope of the danger facing their family. "Professor, will the hot water really stop the bad men from hurting us?" Professor Whitmore knelt to the boy's level, his weathered face kind but unflinchingly honest in the way that frontier children needed adults to be. The water will emerge from those pipes hot enough to stop a charging grizzly bear, young man. But stopping bad men who've chosen to use violence requires more than hot water. It requires courage, intelligence, and people who care enough about each other to fight for what matters most in this world. I can be brave like Papa and Mama Sarah, Sam declared with the absolute certainty that only children possess when they've made up their minds about something important. I know you can, son, and that makes me prouder than you'll understand until you have children of your own someday. Cole finally turned from the window, his face showing the strain of sleepless preparation mixed with fierce, protective love. But your job today isn't to fight. Your job is to stay safe and take care of Sarah if something happens to me. Sarah moved to Cole's side, her hand finding his arm with a touch that conveyed strength rather than seeking comfort. Nothing is going to happen to any of us that we can't handle together. We're going to face this as a family, and we're going to survive it as a family. Before Cole could respond to her quiet confidence, the sound that had been haunting his nightmares since Wade's threatening visit finally materialized. Horses approaching fast through the morning mist, too many horses moving with military precision rather than the casual pace of ordinary travelers. "They're coming," Cole announced, his voice calm despite the ice forming in his veins. "Positions, everyone. Remember the plan." The family moved with practiced efficiency born of their night-long preparations and rehearsals. Sam disappeared into the hidden passage behind the bookshelf, carrying supplies and strict instructions to stay concealed until he heard the specific all-clear signal that would indicate genuine safety. Sarah took her assigned position at the kitchen window with a loaded shotgun and clear sight lines to the eastern approach route. Professor Whitmore descended to the basement where the thermal spring control system waited for his expert manipulation. Cole climbed to the second floor where he'd prepared a sniper's nest with his grandfather's favorite Winchester rifle and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. Through the upstairs window, he could see Wade's assault force approaching with the confidence of men who expected easy victory over isolated defenders. 25 riders spread across the snow-covered landscape like a dark stain against winter's deceptive purity. Professional gunmen from Denver, armed with the latest repeating rifles and enough concentrated firepower to level a frontier town. They moved in coordinated formation, suggesting military experience and careful tactical planning rather than the chaotic charge of amateur bandits. Wade himself rode at the center of the group, his expensive coat making him easy to identify even at considerable distance. Beside him rode a man Cole didn't recognize, tall, lean, with the predatory stillness of a born killer who'd learned to enjoy his work entirely too much. The kind of professional who measured success in bodies rather than money. "Mackenzie!" Wade's voice carried clearly across the frozen ground. "Your time for negotiation has expired. Come out now with your hands visible, and we might allow your family to live long enough to watch you hang." Cole opened the window just enough to sight down his rifle barrel, the cold air rushing in like a physical slap. "The only thing that's expired is your welcome on Mackenzie land. Wade, turn around now or we'll show you what frontier hospitality really looks like." Wade's deadly companion raised his own rifle with professional smoothness that spoke of years spent killing for money. "That's Matthias Kane," Sarah called from downstairs, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. "Wade's personal enforcer and executioner. He's killed more men than cholera and smallpox combined." "Then it's high time someone ended his winning streak," Cole muttered, adjusting his aim with the careful precision his grandfather had drilled into him during countless hunting expeditions. The attack began without warning or ceremony, like summer lightning splitting a clear sky. Kane's rifle cracked with professional authority, and the window beside Cole's head exploded in a shower of glass fragments and wood splinters. Cole rolled away from the opening, came up firing with practiced smoothness, and put a .44 caliber bullet through the crown of Kane's hat, missing his skull by perhaps 2 inches. 24 more rifles opened fire simultaneously, turning the peaceful morning air into a storm of lead and death. Bullets hammered into the thick log walls like deadly hail, shattering every ground floor window and chewing substantial chunks from the reinforced wooden shutters that Ezra had installed decades earlier. "Now, Professor!" Cole shouted over the din of concentrated gunfire. In the basement, Professor Whitmore opened the first valve in his carefully modified thermal spring system. Superheated water, pressurized to dangerous levels and enriched with mineral compounds that would burn exposed skin like concentrated acid, shot through hidden pipes towards strategically placed outlets positioned around the ranch house perimeter. The first group of attackers, advancing confidently toward the front door with the swagger of men who'd done this sort of work many times before, suddenly found themselves engulfed in clouds of scalding steam that rose from the frozen ground like the breath of hell itself. Men screamed in genuine agony and panic, while horses reared and bolted in terror as the air itself became a weapon that seared lungs and blinded eyes. Visibility dropped to zero in the affected areas, footing became treacherous with flash-frozen ice that could break bones, and the assault's momentum died completely in clouds of superheated vapor that transformed familiar terrain into an alien landscape of pain and confusion. But Wade had invested too much money and effort to be deterred by unexpected defensive measures. He'd brought genuine professionals who'd survived frontier violence by adapting to changing circumstances. While the front assault force regrouped and tended their burned comrades, flanking teams moved toward the barn and the house's rear entrance, using cover and tactical movement that demonstrated real military training. They'd studied the ranch's layout carefully and planned for obvious defensive measures like rifle fire from windows and doors. What they hadn't anticipated was Ezra Mackenzie's paranoid genius and 30 years of defensive preparation. Cole shifted to the back bedroom window and opened fire on the flanking team with methodical precision. His shots carefully aimed and devastatingly effective in the clear morning air. Two men fell before the others took cover behind the woodshed and began returning concentrated volleys that made remaining at the upstairs windows tantamount to suicide. "Sarah," Cole called as he retreated from the window under heavy fire, "they're trying to get around behind us." "I can see them." Her shotgun boomed twice in rapid succession, followed by screams of pain and surprise from men who'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating a frontier woman's ability to defend her home and family. The battle settled into a deadly rhythm of advance and retreat, fire and maneuver, with Professor Whitmore's thermal steam system providing crucial tactical advantages at key moments. Every time Wade's men attempted to mass for a coordinated assault on specific positions, the professor would release another carefully timed burst of superheated mineral water, creating walls of scalding vapor that forced attackers to scatter and regroup while defenders repositioned for maximum effectiveness. But the defensive system had significant limitations that Cole understood all too well. The thermal springs, while naturally powerful, could only provide so much pressure before the underground chambers needed substantial time to refill and build pressure again. Each defensive steam burst was precious, requiring perfect timing and strategic thinking to achieve maximum impact. After 90 minutes of continuous fighting, Cole realized with growing dread that they were facing a war of attrition they simply couldn't win through defensive measures alone. Wade had too many men, too much ammunition, too much patience, and most critically, too much money to simply accept defeat and withdraw. Eventually, the thermal system would be exhausted, their ammunition would run dangerously low, and sheer numbers would overwhelm even the most expertly prepared defensive positions. "We need to change the fundamental nature of this engagement," Cole called to Sarah during a brief lull in the gunfire. "What do you have in mind?" Before Cole could articulate his half-formed tactical ideas, an entirely new sound cut through the winter air. A single rider approaching from the east, moving fast despite the treacherous conditions and the obvious danger of riding into an active battlefield. Cole trained his rifle on the approaching figure, then lowered it in complete surprise as recognition dawned. Sheriff Daniel Hayes rode through the crossfire with the calm, unshakable authority of a man who'd faced death so many times it had become routine rather than terrifying. His badge caught the morning sunlight like a beacon of legitimate law in a landscape dominated by violence and greed. His weathered face showed no fear as bullets whined around him, and his steady hands guided his horse with the expertise of someone who'd spent decades in the saddle under dangerous circumstances. "That's far enough, Wade," Hayes called, his voice carrying absolute legal authority across the battlefield. You and your men are under arrest for assault with deadly weapons, attempted murder, conspiracy to commit fraud, in violation of federal homestead laws. Wade's response was a laugh that echoed across the snow-covered landscape with all the warmth of breaking ice. Under whose authority, Sheriff? You're operating outside your jurisdiction, outnumbered by professional soldiers, and facing men who don't recognize territorial law when it conflicts with business necessity. Hayes calmly reached into his saddlebag and produced a leather document case bearing official federal seals. Under the authority of the United States Marshal Service, Mr. Wade, Marshal William Sherman sends his personal regards, along with federal warrants for your arrest on charges of interstate commerce fraud, conspiracy to commit murder across territorial boundaries, and systematic violation of federal homestead protection laws. The sustained gunfire slackened noticeably as Wade's hired men absorbed this unexpected legal development. Federal charges meant federal prison terms, federal marshals who couldn't be bribed or intimidated, and consequences that extended far beyond territorial boundaries where Wade's influence might provide protection. But Wade had invested too much time, money, and criminal effort to retreat now, even in the face of federal legal authority. His entire business empire depended on acquiring Mackenzie Ranch and its valuable mineral deposits. "Kill the sheriff!" he screamed with the desperation of a man watching his fortune slip away. "Kill them all! No witnesses, no federal interference!" Matthias Kane's rifle swung toward Hayes with professional smoothness, but Cole's Winchester spoke first. The heavy bullet took Kane's center mass, the impact spinning him from his saddle to lie motionless in snow that quickly turned red around his still form. The sudden death of their acknowledged leader seemed to break something fundamental in Wade's assault force. Professional gunmen were certainly willing to face ordinary frontier dangers for ordinary pay, but federal marshals backed by expert riflemen defending carefully prepared positions represented a level of risk that far exceeded their standard contracts and compensation expectations. 3 men immediately threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. 5 more began backing steadily toward their horses, clearly planning tactical withdrawal rather than continuing a fight that had become unprofitable. The coordinated military assault dissolved into individual survival decisions as each hired gun calculated his personal odds of living through the next hour. "Professor," Cole called, recognizing the tactical opportunity. "Maximum pressure. Give us everything the system can produce." Professor Whitmore opened every valve simultaneously, sending the thermal spring system far beyond its designed operational limits. Geysers of superheated water erupted around the ranch house like natural artillery, creating a defensive perimeter that no living creature could hope to cross safely. Steam clouds billowed skyward in impressive displays of geological power. Ice formed instantly where the scorching water contacted the freezing air, and the very ground became too dangerous for men or horses to approach. In the chaos of scalding vapor, panicked animals, and disintegrating assault formations, Cornelius Wade made his final fatal mistake. Desperate to salvage something meaningful from his failed assault, and facing the complete collapse of years of careful planning, he spurred his expensive horse directly toward the house, planning to break through the steam barrier through sheer determination and settle this matter with personal violence. Cole met him at the front door, both men firing simultaneously in a confrontation that had become inevitable from the moment Wade first set foot on Mackenzie land. Wade's bullet shattered the wooden doorframe exactly where Cole's head had been a split second earlier. Cole's bullet found its intended target with the deadly precision that 3 generations of frontier life had bred into Mackenzie bones and nerves. Cornelius Wade fell from his saddle and lay perfectly still in snow that was already beginning to cover his expensive coat with nature's own shroud. The remaining attackers broke completely and fled toward the horizon, abandoning their wounded comrades and their employer's body in their desperate haste to escape federal justice and geological warfare that exceeded anything they'd encountered in years of frontier violence. Sheriff Hayes made no attempt to pursue the fleeing gunman, instead dismounting carefully to check Wade's condition and begin the legal formalities that would officially close this bloody chapter of corruption, greed, and murder. As the defensive steam gradually cleared and blessed silence returned to Mackenzie Ranch, the true survivors emerged from their positions to assess both the immediate damage and the long-term implications of their hard-won victory. Cole methodically counted bullet holes in log walls, that would need professional repair, shattered windows that would require replacement before the next blizzard, and emotional scars that would need time and family love to heal properly. But they were alive, all of them, including Sam, who emerged from his hiding place with the remarkable resilience that frontier children develop through necessity rather than choice. The ranch remained firmly in Mackenzie's hands. The thermal springs continued to flow with their life-giving warmth, and the legacy of 3 generations would continue into an uncertain but hopeful future. "Is it finally over, Papa?" Sam asked, his young voice cutting through the adult conversations about legal procedures and property rights. "Are all the bad men gone for good this time?" Cole gathered his son into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of the boy's small body and the steady rhythm of his breathing. "It's over, son. The bad men won't be bothering our family anymore." Sarah joined them in the doorway, her shotgun finally silent, her face showing the strain of sustained combat, but also the deep satisfaction that came from successfully defending everything that mattered most in the world. "Sheriff Hayes, how did you know to arrive precisely when we needed you most?" Hayes smiled with genuine warmth, removing his hat to reveal gray hair and tired eyes that had witnessed too much of human nature's darker aspects over the years. "I've been tracking Wade's criminal organization for nearly 2 years, waiting for him to make a mistake substantial enough to justify full federal intervention. When Professor Whitmore's telegram reached me yesterday describing the escalating situation, I knew the time had finally come to end this particular chapter of territorial corruption." "Telegraph?" Cole asked. "When did you send a telegram, Professor?" Professor Whitmore emerged from the basement, his clothes thoroughly soaked with steam and his spectacles completely fogged, but his expression showing the profound satisfaction of a man whose scientific theories had proven themselves under the ultimate practical test. "Yesterday evening, while you were all focused on defensive preparations, I took the liberty of contacting several colleagues, including Sheriff Hayes, with whom your grandfather had maintained correspondence regarding Wade's activities." "Grandfather knew Hayes?" "Daniel Hayes and I have been tracking the same criminal network from different angles," Hayes explained, securing his firearms and beginning to examine the battlefield for evidence. "Your grandfather provided crucial information about land fraud and illegal mineral rights transfers. He understood that Wade's operation extended far beyond simple property theft." Sam tugged on Hayes' coat with the directness that only children brought to adult mysteries. "Are you going to be my grandfather now, since my real grandfather went to heaven?" Hayes knelt to Sam's level, his weathered face softening with genuine emotion. "Well, young man, that depends on whether your family would welcome an old lawman into their circle. I'd be honored to be your grandfather, if you'll have me." Before Sam could respond, Sarah stepped forward with an expression of dawning recognition and disbelief. "Daniel? Daniel Mitchell?" Hayes looked up sharply, his eyes widening as he truly saw Sarah's face for the first time since his arrival. "Sarah Elizabeth? My godchild, I thought you were dead. When Marcus Sterling died and you disappeared, I searched for months." "Papa?" Sarah's voice broke on the word, 15 years of grief and loss pouring out in a single syllable. "But the mine collapse in Colorado, they told me you were dead, that they never found your body. I had to disappear, sweetheart. I was getting too close to something that powerful men wanted to keep buried. Faking my death in that mine collapse was the only way to stay alive long enough to build a case against the entire corruption network." Hayes rose and opened his arms. "I've been looking for you ever since, using every resource the Marshal Service would provide." The reunion between father and daughter took place on the blood-stained porch of the ranch house, 15 years of separation and grief dissolving in an embrace that seemed to heal old wounds and create new possibilities for the future. Sam watched with fascination as adults cried tears of joy, learning that sometimes the most powerful emotions came from happiness rather than sorrow. Cole felt his own throat tighten as he witnessed Sarah's transformation from guarded survivor to beloved daughter, seeing her face light up with a joy he'd never witnessed during their brief but intense relationship. "This changes everything," Professor Whitmore observed quietly, joining Cole in appreciating the family reunion. "Sarah now has legal protection through her father's federal law enforcement position. Wade's surviving associates won't dare risk further action against a federal marshal's daughter." As Christmas afternoon settled over the ranch, The expanded family gathered around the fireplace to share their first meal together in safety and genuine peace. Sarah prepared a feast from their limited supplies, transforming simple ingredients into a celebration worthy of the day and the circumstances. Sam insisted on setting a place for his grandfather Ezra, explaining solemnly that important family members should be remembered even when they couldn't be present. Professor Whitmore produced a bottle of excellent whiskey that he'd been saving for a special occasion, while Hayes contributed stories of his years in law enforcement that fascinated Sam and impressed the adults with their scope and complexity. But the most remarkable gift came from Sam himself. As they finished their meal, the boy stood up with the formal seriousness that children brought to important announcements. "I want to say something to everybody," he declared. "Before the bad men came, I was scared that we weren't really a family because we didn't all have the same names or the same blood. But today, I learned that family isn't about names or blood. It's about people who take care of each other and fight for each other and love each other no matter what happens." He looked around the table, his young face glowing with absolute certainty. "Mama Sarah, you're my real mama now, not just because you married Papa, but because you stayed and fought for us. Papa, you're the bravest man in the whole territory. Professor, you're like having a grandfather who knows everything about everything. And Sheriff Hayes, Grandpa Hayes, you came just when we needed you most, like angels do in the Christmas stories." Sam paused, gathering his thoughts with the seriousness that the moment deserved. "So I want to ask all of you, are we really and truly a family now? Forever and always, no matter what?" The unanimous yes that arose from around the table seemed to seal something precious and permanent, a bond that went deeper than legal documents or blood relationships. They were a family by choice, forged in the crucible of shared danger and mutual protection, strengthened by love that had been tested under the most extreme circumstances. As winter deepened and spring seemed impossibly distant, the Mackenzie family settled into routines that acknowledged their new reality. Professor Whitmore established a laboratory in the barn, beginning the scientific research that would eventually make Mackenzie Ranch famous throughout the academic world. Sheriff Hayes used his federal authority to ensure that Wade's surviving associates faced appropriate justice, while also establishing legal protections that would prevent future attempts to steal Mackenzie property. Sarah divided her time between managing the household, studying advanced medical techniques with Professor Whitmore, and slowly learning to trust that her new life was real and permanent rather than another temporary refuge that would eventually crumble under external pressure. Cole threw himself into ranch work with renewed energy, expanding their operations and planning improvements that would accommodate the scientific research facility and medical treatment center that seemed to be emerging from their unique combination of natural resources and intellectual expertise. But the most remarkable transformation belonged to Sam, who blossomed under the security of parents who'd proven they would face any danger to protect him. His natural curiosity returned in full force, along with the joy and enthusiasm that trauma had temporarily suppressed. He spent his days learning ranch work from Cole, herbal medicine from Sarah, scientific observation from Professor Whitmore, and law enforcement techniques from Sheriff Hayes, absorbing knowledge with the hunger of a child who understood that education was both privilege and responsibility. 20 years later, on a crisp autumn morning in 1898, Samuel Mackenzie stood in the same spot where his father had once faced down Cornelius Wade's assault force. But instead of violence and desperation, he saw prosperity and promise stretching toward the distant mountains that still guarded the valley where 4 generations of Mackenzies had built their legacy. The ranch now encompassed 8,000 acres of prime grazing land, a world-renowned therapeutic facility that attracted patients from across America and Europe, and carefully managed mineral extraction operations that provided sustainable income without damaging the environment that supported them. The Mackenzie Institute for Advanced Studies had become one of the most respected research centers in the American West, combining practical education with cutting-edge scientific investigation. Sam had grown into a man who understood both the value of tradition and the necessity of progress. He managed cattle and horses with the expertise inherited from generations past, while also applying geological and chemical knowledge to develop the family's natural resources responsibly and profitably. His wife Mary, the former schoolteacher who'd captured his heart with her intelligence and compassion, had proved herself worthy of the Mackenzie name through her dedication to education and community service. Together, they had established schools throughout the territory, ensuring that other children had access to the educational opportunities that had shaped Sam's own development. "Tell me the story again, Papa," requested Sam's 8-year-old son, Ezra Mackenzie IV, named for the great-great-grandfather whose wisdom and preparation had made their current prosperity possible. Sam settled the boy on his lap in the same chair where his own father had once held him, beginning the tale that had become family legend, the story of a winter morning when courage, love, scientific ingenuity, and family loyalty had saved everything that mattered, from men who believed that money could buy anything, including other people's dreams and futures. "It was the coldest winter anyone could remember," Sam began, using the same words his father had taught him. "Snow fell for days without stopping, and the wind cut through a man's coat like he wasn't wearing anything at all. But inside our house, the thermal springs kept us warm and safe, just like they keep us warm and safe today." Young Ezra listened with the intense attention that each new generation brought to the family story, absorbing not just the dramatic events, but the fundamental values they represented: the absolute importance of family loyalty, the necessity of courage when facing impossible odds, and the understanding that some principles were worth any sacrifice to protect and preserve. Outside the window, the same thermal springs that had saved their ancestors continued to flow with geological patience, carrying mineral-rich water from deep underground chambers toward the surface where it would heal the sick, warm the living, and remind future generations that the earth itself could be humanity's ally if people had the wisdom to work with natural forces rather than against them. The Mackenzie legacy was secure, built on foundations stronger than money or political power, love that had been tested under fire, courage that had faced down overwhelming odds, intelligence that had transformed natural resources into sustainable prosperity, and the deep understanding that true wealth came from protecting what mattered most rather than destroying others to steal what they had built through honest labor and sacrifice. As winter twilight settled over the ranch, 4 generations of Mackenzies gathered around the fireplace where their story had begun so many years ago. Cole, now silver-haired but still strong enough to work alongside men half his age, held his grandson while sharing memories of the grandfather who'd prepared for dangers that wouldn't arrive for decades. Sarah, still beautiful despite the years that had added wisdom to her natural intelligence, continued her medical research while preparing the evening meal that would bring the family together once again. Professor Whitmore, approaching 90 but still sharp as the mineral crystals he'd spent his life studying, maintained his research and his teaching, passing on to each new generation the scientific knowledge that had made their prosperity possible and sustainable. Sheriff Hayes, now retired but still carrying in himself with the quiet authority that had made him respected throughout the territory, shared law enforcement stories that entertained the children while teaching important lessons about justice and responsibility. And somewhere in the distance, the thermal springs bubbled and steamed as they had for thousands of years before the first Mackenzie arrived, and as they would continue for thousands of years after the last one departed, patient and eternal and ready to serve those wise enough to understand their true value. The winter that had nearly destroyed them had instead forged them into something stronger and more enduring than any of them had dared to hope. The legacy they'd built together would continue as long as there were Mackenzies to remember that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for, and ultimately, worth dedicating entire lifetimes to protecting and improving. In the end, that was perhaps the most important lesson of all. Not simply that good people could defeat evil ones, though that remained true, but that families built on genuine love, mutual respect, and shared sacrifice could survive anything the world might send against them and emerge stronger, wiser, and more unified than ever before. The fire burned low as it had so many times before. The stars emerged in their ancient patterns, and the Mackenzie family settled in for another peaceful night, secure in the knowledge that they had earned their happiness through struggle, sacrifice, and the simple determination never to surrender what they'd built together through love, courage, and unshakable faith in each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fresh opportunities, and eventually new generations to carry on the work that Ezra Mackenzie had begun with such vision and determination so many years ago. But tonight, they were simply a family gathered around their hearth, telling the stories that would someday become legends, taking comfort in the knowledge that home was not merely a place on any map, but a promise that love, courage, and wisdom would always be sufficient to protect what truly mattered in this uncertain world. The winter winds sang their timeless song around the ranch, but within these walls, warmth and love had triumphed over cold and hatred. The Mackenzie legacy would endure, carried forward by children who understood that some stories were worth retelling, some battles worth fighting, and some homes worth any sacrifice to protect.